we know that water is one of our basic human needs, right? Humans need some basic things to survive, and we talk about that a lot. We need water, we need shelter, we need food, and we need space. Today, the thing we're going to talk about is the water part. I'm going to draw a little raindrop to remind us that we're talking about water in this lesson. Now, since the very beginning of being humans, humans have needed to find water. Some humans settled in places like by the Nile River, like we talked about a few days ago, because they were right by water, and that gave them a lovely place to live and have that basic need for water to be met. But some humans live in places where it's harder to get water. In places like the plains, where it's dry and grassy and doesn't get much rain. Or in places like deserts, where it almost never rains at all. And when humans have lived in those places, both in the past and now, they have to do tricky, clever things to get enough water to survive. Sometimes they make special things that are kind of like a big giant sheet to collect the rain. Sometimes they dig deep underground until they find the water that's hidden under there. It's called groundwater. There's water hidden underground. And when a human digs a big hole down into the ground to get the water that's hiding there, we call it a well. You might think about wells from stories with a wishing well. There was that story we read with the little mouse who was trying to throw the pennies in. There's a myth that if you toss a penny in a well, you can get a wish. What really happens with a well is you get water, which is more important than a wish because it's one of your basic needs. Now, wells are awesome. Some people in our class who live further outside of town, most of them aren't here today, but some people who live further outside of town might even get the water that they drink, like out of their tap at home, might come from a well. People who live outside of town sometimes do. What we're going to talk about today has to do with wells, but it doesn't have to do with humans at all. So what we're going to talk about are some animals. These are some donkeys. And these are some horses. They both have something in common, other than that they are both in the same family. They both have hooves. They're the same family of animals. But the ones in these pictures are not pet donkeys, folks in the back, nor are they pet horses. They are feral. The word feral means they used to be domesticated. They used to be pets or farm animals. And then they stopped. So it's not wild and it's not domesticated. It's kind of in between. These horses' parents might have been on a farm, or their grandparents might have been on a farm, or their great-grandparents. But now they're going back to being wild again. They're not completely wild, but they're going back that direction. Feral horses in Australia, where this story takes place, are called brumbies. I thought that was an interesting thing. Brumbies. So these are brumbies, and here are some feral donkeys. And often, people are not a fan of brumbies and feral donkeys. They think that they're doing bad things and getting in the way and eating up the plants that they want for other animals and causing all sorts of trouble. But people are beginning to discover, as I learned just this weekend from a friend of mine and then thought, oh my goodness, this is really cool, I need to go research it and share it with everyone. They're actually changing the environment they live in and helping a whole bunch of other animals stay alive. So what these feral donkeys and brumbies have been doing is digging wells. Remember, all these pictures will be out later if you want to look at them really close. This is a picture of a donkey digging a well. And this is a picture of a donkey digging a well. The way they dig the well is they find a dry riverbed. So the rivers around here don't often get dry. But in drier parts of the world, there are times of year when there's water in the river and times of the year when the river is just empty. When the river is kind of just like a ditch with no water in it. And so what these donkeys have been doing is going into the dry riverbeds and digging a hole. And they dig the hole until they reach the groundwater, the secret water that's hidden underground. And it fills it up, and then they drink out of it. But when they're done drinking out of it and they leave, there's still a lovely hole full of water. And so all sorts of other animals come to the holes. 57 different species have been caught on camera at one hole dug by a feral donkey. That means 57 different types of animal have gotten the water they needed to stay alive because a donkey dug a well, which is pretty cool. 57 different animals, not even different animals, different species. That means different types of birds, different types of lizards, different types of mammals, all sorts of things. Definitely no fish, though. Got the water they needed to survive because the donkeys dug this hole, which is pretty neat. But what's extra cool is it's not just donkeys doing this work. The Brumbies are doing this work. In other parts of the world, elephants do this work too. Elephants dig wells. When there's not enough water, elephants will find a place where there used to be water, a dry riverbed or a dry lake, and start digging. And certainly a hole dug by an elephant would be big enough for some other animals to get some water out afterwards too. Another animal that digs these holes that I think is really especially cute is this one. This is a wombat. Some wombats were observed digging a hole that was 4 meters deep. So a wombat is about the size of, if you took Esri and made her legs stubby and short, that would be like the size of a wombat. A meter are those big rulers we have. It's about up to my hand. So if a wombat dug a hole 1, 2, 3, 4 meters deep, that means these little guys dug a hole deeper than how high the ceiling of our class is. Those of you who are here but not Austin, peek over there for a second. That's a meter, but not Austin, but not Austin. Oh. Thank you. Thanks. All right. Now, an extra special thing, the last step, happens when they're done. Because eventually, the hole dries up. There's only so much water, and it gets dry again. But when it's dry, it's not as dry as out here. It's just a tiny bit damp. And so that leaves a little space where seeds have a better chance of growing. And so trees have started growing out of these wells. Once the well dries up and the animals can't come and drink out of it anymore, they turn into a nursery place for trees to start to grow. And then once the trees get bigger, they create shade, which means that the water will dry up more slowly underneath. There's a picture here that you won't be able to see very well until you come investigate later. But there's a tree growing out of an old well dug by a feral donkey or a Brumby a while ago, maybe a couple years before, since this tree isn't a baby anymore. That means that we get to put feral donkeys and feral horses, the Brumbies, in the same category as elephants and beavers. We've talked about this category before of habitat engineers. Give me a nod if you remember talking about habitat engineers. If you don't, no worries. They are the creatures that when they change the world to make it good for them, it changes things so much that the whole shape of the habitat changes. Just like when a beaver makes a dam, they end up making a pond that makes a home for a whole bunch of other animals. When donkeys and Brumbies are meeting their own needs, they end up helping a whole bunch of other animals meet their needs. And sometimes can be in charge of starting a little forest. People are slowly starting to realize that feral animals that people in general tend to not like very much and tend to try and get rid of, and sometimes even just go kill to make them go away, are actually important to the environment as well. They're not just leftover creatures who we used to need before we had machines and don't need anymore. They're still doing good work and they're still helping the world, even though we're not using them quite so much to do things like pull our carts or help us plant our crops anymore.